And I'm going to say hello to you as you start to come on. Hello, Cowabunga, who's here waiting. Thank you for your comment. I'm really excited today because we've got a real treat for everybody. Penny Griffiths Morgan, who is an excellent historian, and also as well she investigates the paranormal. And as you'll see, the two really gel together very perfectly. And I actually think maybe if they actually put a little bit of ghost stories into history at school, maybe the children might remember it just a little bit more. But Penny also has a story which we'll come to later about one of her teachers that influenced her. And I won't go too much into Penny's history at the moment because I'm going to sort of say about Penny, her books. She's an author, she's appeared on TV, Help My House is Haunted, but that will unfold throughout this hour that we have together. So, hello Nando, I hope that you're doing great. So Penny, thank you so much, because I must say as well, poor Penny's had the flu, and you're so brave to actually be here, so I'm really pleased that you're here at the moment. So thank you. So you've got plenty of drinks to...
Plenty of fluids, yes. Hopefully I won't be coughing too much. There you go.
And for those on Facebook and YouTube, I have the comments at the side, so should you wish to chat to each other as well, because I know that those on Facebook, those on YouTube, you can't chat, I'll put it up at the side, so hopefully you'll like this. You can chat amongst yourself and answer each other's questions as well. Hello Anna, lovely for seeing you here, and Amanda, thank you for dropping in. So Penny, I'm going to sort of start off right early on.
Right.
You had a very interesting experience with your sister, which you're writing a book about, which we'll hear a little bit more later, called the Tinkerbell, or you mention it as the Tinkerbell experience.
Yeah.
When was that the first seed for you really becoming interested in the paranormal, or was there other times before? Because I know so many children love the paranormal. And can you explain that experience over, because it is a fascinating story?
Of course. I think I've always, even as a small child, I believed there was something that I didn't understand. I grew up in the middle of a tiny little village in Norfolk. Lots of very old buildings, lots of like folklore type stories that the older villagers would like to tell the children in the village. But there was this old barn. It was a dark wood barn, and it was derelict. And my parents had always said to my sister and I, you don't go in it, it's dangerous, stay away. Well, we never actually went in it, but we used to dare each other to look through the door, like the cracks in the paneling. And there was one time we were out walking our dog in the village, and we were looking through the door, and what we saw in there, I describe as Tinkerbell. That's the only way I can describe it. It was an incredibly bright light, and it was flying around inside, and it wasn't following an air pattern. It would shoot off, then go up, and it was almost like a Harrier jump jet, the way it was like moving around. And it flew at where we were looking through the door, the paneling in the door, and just hovered in front of us and then vanished. And my sister and I could not move for a few minutes. It was almost like we, pardon the pun, had been hypnotized. We just couldn't move. And I never saw it again, never experienced it again. But I must have been about 9 or 10 when that happened. So my sister would have been 6 or 7. And she would never talk about it. It's almost like she blanked it. And I know she saw it because we both did. She would never really talk about it to me, about what happened, what she thought it was. And I spent years thinking about this experience, trying to work out what it was. And even with all the knowledge I have now, I still don't know. Could it have been a fairy? I really, really have no idea. I know it wasn't light coming in, because there was no light coming into the building. I know we don't obviously have insects in the UK that glow that brightly, do we? We don't have like glow flies and things like that. So it can't have been that. But it was the fact that we couldn't move. We were we paralysed to the spot. And I've always remembered it, and I hope one day something will say, do you know what it was? It was ABC. Because even now, I mean, I spoke to Kate Ray, who knows a lot about like fairy lore and all of that, and she said to me it could have possibly been a fairy. But it's like, did I see a fairy at 9, 10 years old? Is that what I saw? But yeah, I called it Tinkerbell, because when you watch like Peter Pan and stuff with Tinkerbell, she glows, doesn't she? She's like this amazing iridescent glow. That's what it was like. That's exactly what it was like. So yeah, that was probably one of the first major things that I ever thought. And obviously that wasn't a ghost. It was just paranormal, in that I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, I was going to say, which you have done. Have you spoken to Kate? Because I think as well, do see one of Penny's talks, but also I get a chance to see one of Kate's talks as well. They're just absolutely fascinating, and I think it's one of the things, because she goes into the fae and fairies. Yeah. She really kind of made sense of it all when she started talking, and it seemed to move away from just folklore to, maybe there's something really generally in this.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I spoke to her about it, and I genuinely don't know. I have no idea what it was, other than my sister would never ever talk about it. For the rest of her life, she would not talk about it. Which, yeah, my sister wasn't quiet very often.
I must say hello to Patricia, Mark, Michelle, Lorian, Annette, and Lorna, who have joined us. So thank you all for joining. And that takes me on to the next person who was a big influence of your life, skipping forward some years now. One of your teachers was hugely influential. What was about their teaching style that really grasped your love of history?
Phil Hancock is who you're talking about. He was as mad as a box of frogs, in a brilliant way. He loved history. I mean, people think I love history when I talk about it. Listen, he puts me to shame. He used to put me to shame, his love of history. And to be a teacher as well, who was trying to bestow that love of his subject to students who, to be fair, half of them couldn't give a monkey's. And yet he still kept the energy up. And what he loved was, if someone wanted to know more, he was so willing to give them his time, even as a busy secondary school teacher. And he saw in me that I enjoyed it. He saw in me that I did want to ask questions, and I did want to say, well, why is this? And why do people assume that? And what does that mean? And what's that for? Rather than just learning verbatim what was in the book, I was questioning it. And yeah, he actually, when I took my A-levels, I said I was taking history A-level, and he actually said to my mum, that's a big mistake. She'll fail. She will hate history A-level. Degree, she'd flourish at, but history A-level, she's going to hate it. And he was right. And I did fail it, because it was boring. So yeah, he was the one that really cemented my love of the subject. He actually died when he was in his early 40s, and yeah, I think I was about 20, 21 when he died, and I was genuinely incredibly upset when he died, because I actually think he'd be quite pleased with what I do now. He would have been, I knew you had it in you, sort of thing. He would have been one that, had I had the courage to talk about ghosts at 13, 14, he would have sat and talked to me about it. He's that kind of person. He loved history, and he saw how it had a place in a lot of things, learning about history.
Yeah, how did you find talking? So I also want to say hello to, thank you, Annette, that's very kind of you, and Debs, hello to you. I was going to say, because when I was at school, we all loved ghost stories. I think we were at the sort of time of the Strange But True, which has been making the rounds, found a book again recently that I loved. So that kind of has made sort of the rounds. So we were always kind of, and I went to a school that was quite open-minded about like the ghosts and things that people would say about their strange experiences. Was that like it in your school, or was it No, a bit different. Oh, blimey, that's
No,
totally different
no.
school then.
Yeah, no. I mean, my best friend and I, when we were both at secondary school, we would talk about it behind the scenes at hers and everything else. But thing is, though, her and I mean, I'm alternative anyway. I was even then at 13, so people thought we were the weirdos as it was. But no, we rarely talked about it in public, what we believed in, what we thought might be happening, weird experiences. We kept it to ourselves because it wasn't just that the school itself, but I came from quite a straight-laced family. So, they struggled enough with the fact that I listened to heavy metal, let alone if I started talking about ghosts and hauntings and Ouija boards and everything. I think my parents would have disowned me. So it was kept quite sort of secret back then. But no, we didn't. I mean, yes, I remember when I was a girl guide, I used to have my party trick was a ghost story I'd tell around the campfire. And I did it so well once, so I had 2 girls run off screaming and crying because they were so scared.
Fantastic. We'll have to hear about that one day.
I can't even remember the story now.
Oh, no.
It was something to do with a skeletal hand that came to life, and the thing we were in, I got 2 of my troop to go up on top and throw twigs at the people whilst I was telling this story about these skeletal hands.
Fantastic.
I can't remember the story now. It was a long time ago, but it used to be one that people, tell the story. So I'd tell this story, but what they didn't know was 2 or 3 of my troop were hiding, throwing down these twigs as skeletal fingers. So yeah, I used to quite happy. But then again, I was very good at English and drama, so I used to tell sort of stories and things like that anyway. But but no, I think Phil would have. He would have, if I'd started talking to him about the history of ghosts and the history of the paranormal, and he would have talked about it because it was history. Everything has a history. And by only saying I'll only talk about certain types of history, you're limiting yourself quite a lot.
Exactly. And you sort of said you and your friend were the weird ones is at school. I always find so if you kind of feel like if you're listening, you're a bit younger and you feel like you're one of those children in school, they're the ones who always have the really interesting jobs and hobbies later on in life. I find it always seems to be the way of things.
Yeah.
But you said that you were very fond of this teacher and when he passed away, and that comes on to the book that you're writing now and your sister. You also had, when you were at the funeral, an incredibly weird experience with your car keys.
Yes.
I know people are going to love that story. If you can say it, please.
Of course. So it was the summer. It was the summer that Phil had died, and whilst the funeral itself was just for immediate family, because they did actually have a big service at one of our local churches for anyone who wanted to attend to pay their respects. And my mum had called me because I didn't live in that part of Norwich by then, and she'd said, look, they're having a service for Phil, do you want to go? And I was like, well, yes, because I genuinely, nothing weird, I genuinely adored him. He was one of my favourite ever teachers. And I'd driven to the funeral. I only had 1 set of keys at this point for my car because my then boyfriend had managed to break the other set of keys by using them to try and jimmy open something that wasn't a car door. So I only had 1 key for my car. This is important. And I'd put my car keys on top in my handbag, on top. They weren't touching anything. They weren't leaning on anything. I wasn't leaning on them. There was no hot pipes. Nothing like that. There was nothing that could have done what happened. So had the funeral. Everyone's obviously very upset, as you can imagine. He was only in his early 40s. I'd seen some of my old teachers, which was bittersweet. It was nice to see them, but also not nice, if that makes sense. And I went to get in my car. And I went to take my keys out of my handbag. And my car key, and everyone listening will know how thick a car key is, had twisted 180 degrees and then bent over double. I was like, how could this happen? I was, anyway, no mobile phones then, because we're talking 30 years ago here. So I knew that my sister was at home where my parents lived, which is about 2 miles up the road. And so I called her and I said, I've got a problem here. I need to get to a locksmith to get this key straightened out because I don't know what's happened. So she came and got me, and we drove at a rate of knots across Norwich, because the only locksmith we could find was in a part of Norwich called Anglia Square, which is, for anyone who knows Norwich, is the other side of Norwich to where I was. And she was driving like a lunatic, and we were hysterical laughter. It was one of the most fun experiences I'd had. Anyway, got to the locksmith just before he shut, and he was like, "How the hell did you manage this?" He couldn't even straighten it using all his equipment. And it was like, I don't know. I said it was on top of my bag. There was no heat. There was no pressure. Something caused my key to twist and bend over double. He managed to cut me a new one. He had to break it in the end and try and sort of stick it together to cut me a new one. And it worked, and I got my car home. Everything's fine. My dad is a mechanical engineer by trade. He found a load of spare cut old car keys and started trying to replicate what had happened to me using everything that I had. He couldn't do it. And to this day, I still don't. I've got theories as to what it could have been. Definitely paranormal. But my sister died about a year later.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And I am wondering if I'd got in the car and driven, I was going to have had an accident. That's one thing I'm wondering, if what it was. Or is it that because we don't know what time spirits see things in, do they see what, almost 12 months ahead because they're seeing it in a different time perspective to us? Did Phil know that I was going to lose my sister and wanted me to have an experience with her that I was still going to put a smile on my face even when I was going through the deepest grief you can imagine? I don't know, but I have never, ever... Say, my dad spent weeks trying to replicate what happened to this key. Couldn't do it.
Yeah, and it would take quite a... And with the keys, as with your boyfriend, it snapped. It didn't bend, so it's quite an incredible story.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carbon. It's very kind of you to say so. So you have that wonderful experience and the memories. So it's nice to think that possibly was because of your teacher coming through and doing something for you. But just moving on a little bit in time, because literally could spend hours and hours and hours talking about all of the history and everything and all the paranormal experiences that you've had. But moving on to... People may recognise you from Help My House Is Haunted. If you haven't seen Help My House Is Haunted or Celebrity Help My House Is Haunted, you've got to watch them. They're wonderful programmes. You're an historian, which I think it was Jane Harris that first of all brought you forward.
Yeah.
So if you can say some of the stories you're in, because people go, I want to watch the ones that Penny's in, they can go straight to those on the streaming services. And also as well, that leads us neatly on to Epping Forest and... the book that is published and is out now at the moment, the most recent one, which is out available. Okay. So, the start of all that.
Yeah. Well, you're correct. If anyone doesn't like seeing my face appearing on the screen for Help My House Is Haunted, it's Jane Harris you need to have words with, because she was the one that put my name forward. Back during COVID, when they were doing an episode in Epping Forest with Frankie Essex. It was an episode of Celebrity Help My House Is Haunted with Frankie Essex. And I've been on every series since. They you know this obviously because you've been on Help as well, Paul. They tend not to use the same historian more than once per series, which is why you will see regular faces cropping up every series, but you'll only ever see us coming up for one episode. Because I know there's a couple that people say, oh, they should make them the permanent historian. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. That's not their MO. That's not how they like to operate. But yeah, I do. I've been on every episode, every series since. I think every single one I do, it's a challenge because they're like, right, see what you can find this time then that's not in the history books. And I seem to come up with something every time. And I do think I'm almost being guided when I'm finding some of the stories because they're not commonly known ones.
Brilliant.
I think my favourite one that I did was the Jake Quickenden episode that was in Colchester. Not just because that's the closest one to where I live that I've ever done, so I was able to get home within 30 minutes. But all I got told was Jake Quickenden, he's bought a house. He's obviously from Scunthorpe, I think, originally. Bought a house in a place called Boxton Heath, just outside of Colchester. It's a brand new build, and there's stuff going on, and we don't know why. And looking into, and they said Civil War. That's all I got told. And what I found out was that I knew that Boxted Heath had something to do with the Civil War, just from general knowledge. And when I started digging into it, and I found out that exactly on where his house is, there wasn't a farmhouse. And in the 1930s, they were renovating the farmhouse, and they found a secret room that nobody knew existed. It was like it had been made up with drywall. And so they broke through, and they found a loft hatch. And when they poked this loft hatch, a body of a Civil War Cavalier soldier fell down on them, still in all their armour. Yeah. And when I then started sort of looking more into the journals that they wrote back in the 17th century, that there had been some Cavalier soldiers who had managed to get out of Colchester, because Colchester was under siege, and they'd been injured, and one of them had disappeared, and they think he actually climbed into this loft and died in this loft. But what was weird was Jake Quickenden was being, in effect, haunted by a Civil War soldier. And when he described him, it was quite obvious he was Cavalier. And he thinks maybe a past life, he was a Cavalier in the Civil War. And that's probably been, I mean, I love every episode I do, because, you know, they tell me to research. I get paid to research stuff. I mean, that's like nirvana for me. And the more the better, as far as they're concerned. But to find that out, and I had no clue about what he was experiencing, and it was just thing after thing after thing just kept coming forwards that they were able to validate. And that episode still sends shivers up my back with what was discussed. I mean, all of them do, to be honest. You know, whenever I find some research out about a place, and then I see them do their investigation, and like this really strange name comes through that's in one of the names I've given them, and it comes through, and it's just like, how does that happen? I don't understand. So yeah, and then it was actually because I'd done so much research for that first episode, because I kind of go a bit over the top, and Jane was the one who said, you should write a book about this, because you've done so much research. It'd be a shame it doesn't all, because a lot of it, you know what it's like when you film an episode for Help. You might film for 2 hours and they use 5 minutes.
Yes.
And so they'll go down, you know, the production will say, this is the route we're going to go down. Right, you've done all this amazing research, but we're not going to use that because this is the route we want to go down. And it was Jane who said, you've got so much, why don't you do that? Write a book about it. And what Jane Harris says, you got to do, really, haven't you?
Absolutely, indeed. Which, you know, I'll mention something about the book in a minute, but this is a good comment here, Lorna. So many people think that because their house is a new build, that there is no history to it. They forget the land it was built on, always been there, and who knows what might have been in the past. Absolutely.
Well, when I'm researching a place, I tend to ignore what the age of the property is that I'm looking into. I'm looking at the land, I'm looking at the area, I'm looking at what has happened there beforehand. I kind of almost ignore the property and the age of the property, and, you know, whether there might be foundations to an old manor house there or whatever. I kind of ignore a lot of that. I'm looking at the place itself, because if you get yourself fixated just on a property, you will put yourself into a corner that you don't need, back yourself into a corner that you don't need to back into. Sometimes it is the property, sometimes it is something that's happened there or happened next door or whatever. I mean, the episode of Help I'm researching at the moment, it is to do with what's happened in the location, but the land itself was owned by this other location originally, so it's not that far, you know, I'm not stretching it that far. The first one that I did, the Frankie Essex one, all I got told was water. It's water, pretty much. That's all I got told. And I'm like, oh, great, that's really useful. And then, yeah, if anyone's watched that Frankie Essex episode, they'll know it's to do with 2 children whose mother drowned them in one of the streams. And Epping Forest has loads of water in it. Most people don't realise. And all these waterways are linked. like a conduit. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember which of the children's names it was, but one of their names came through. So you do kind of have to think, you can't just go in on the first story they came up with. It was a woman who, she drowned, but there was no water nearby. So I dug into that and I said, well, she didn't actually drown. She was an alcoholic, and she drowned on her own vomit. So it wasn't. So, and I said that one's got absolutely nothing to do with this. And but that was the story they originally wanted me to follow, and I said no, that's not right. That's not the right one. I'm a bit arrogant like that. I'm telling producers like, no, I'm not talking about this one. It's a good story, and it's very, very sad that this woman sort of went downhill like that. But it's not the right one. It's not the right one. And but that was because they'd only found part of the story. They didn't follow it up with all autopsy reports and everything as to what this woman's cause of death was. So that's where I sort of get my nerdy sort of hat on and start really digging, because I don't like not having an answer. So I tend to, when I'm researching, it's like, what questions would I want to know the answers to, and I will find those questions out, because normally that gives you the right sort of story to tell in the end.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mark, for your nice comment. And Lorna said, love to find a secret room in the house. That was something I always wanted to do when I was a kid, is find a secret room. I think so many of us kind of wanted to do that as a child.
Well, so many of us have read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We want the wardrobe that we step through to like get Turkish Delight and Aslan and everything else. I think that's kind of our generation, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is so much. Yeah, it is so much. And you've also got you're also known for on Help My House doing stuff in one take as well. And I think give you
I am the one take wonder. How did you know about that?
I've done my research.
Yes, they call me the one take wonder. It's not just Help that I've done that on. Most things that the first time I filmed anything, I was 17. And didn't know I was going to go here with this one, because this isn't public knowledge.
Good.
And I was doing my A-levels, and I grew up in Norwich, and back in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, Norwich Union, as it was back then, now Aviva, couldn't get enough school leavers. They would even if you messed up your exams, they would have a job for you. But back in sort of 91 was when we had that really, really bad recession, and my parents had convinced me to apply early, like nearly a year early, to go and work at Aviva, Norwich Union, when I finished school. And I was one of the last intake for nearly 4 years of school leavers. And ITN got hold of that and asked to interview me for ITN. And I was one take wonder then.
Brilliant.
I just say to me it's not difficult, but they in fact, so much so they actually came up with a couple of other projects they were going to want me to look into, based in Norwich, for them as a presenter, but unfortunately they never got permission for them, which was a shame. But so that was the first time I ever was a one take wonder back at 17, and it's stuck. But that's I think it is Ben from Back to Back who christened me the one take wonder, or it could have been Adi, the cameraman. I can't remember now which one it was, but yes, when we did the Colchester episode it was a different producer, they said, oh, Penny's the one take wonder, and he was like, yeah, right, okay. And all I could hear was him going, she is a one take wonder, isn't she? You weren't joking. And I was just like, hey, but yes, I'm nicknamed the one take wonder.
Fantastic. So just before we move on to your other book, The Epping Forest, I mean, Dick Turpin is known to have been in that area quite a bit. It's a great place for Londoners to walk, but I've also heard a bizarre story, it's come up a few times, about a lady being found dead in a car with a crossbow in her chest in Epping Forest. And I don't know, your face is kind of like, I've not heard that one before. I just wanted to know if you heard about that, and if it's just one of the rumours that have gone round,
I've not read about that one or written about it. It probably would depend on when it's happened, because I tend not to write about more modern deaths, out of respect for the families.
Of course, of
because I mean
course.
there's a pond in Epping Forest that has a reputation as being it's called the Suicide Pond, and it's meant to have some kind of curse attached to it. And there was about 5-6 years ago, a young lad came out of London and killed himself in it, and a really tragic story. And I'm not laughing or joking about. It's genuinely absolutely tragic. He had
Yes.
he had sickle cell,
Mm.
and I think he was about 18, 19. And I didn't talk about that in the book. I talk about the suicide pond because I found
Yes.
other accounts of people who took their own lives in this specific pond. But what I don't do is say where it is. So I don't want anyone to find it. The police know exactly where it is. Most locals know exactly where it is. But I'm not going to give you any clue as to which
Of
one it is
course.
in the forest. But I also won't talk about some of the more modern killings there out of respect to families. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if that was a case, the crossbow, because I know there was, I think it was the late fall after the Second World War. It was a couple found shot through the head with pistols, and nobody's ever been able to find out who did
Wow.
it. So it was a place where people went because it was kind of a lover's lane, for want of a better term, and people would get killed. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's true, but I don't know the intricacies of that story.
Yes, of course. Just say to Lorna's comments just up there. Yes, yes, it was. I've been in two of them. So thank you, Lorna. And then the book before that was Bosworth, The Battle for Bosworth Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I do know for Bosworth Hall, I don't know an awful lot about all the ghost stories, but the phantom bloodstains. Is that something you cover in the book?
It is something I've covered in the book.
If you can say for the people that don't know about it.
Okay, so one sec. Let me just get the. Oh, I've got it. That's the Battle for Bosworth Hall. Now, there is a reason why it's called the Battle for Bosworth Hall. Because most people have heard the Battle of Bosworth Field, which was the penultimate fight in the Wars of the Roses when Henry Tudor killed Richard III. But that's quite a few miles away, actually, from Market Bosworth, even though it's seen to be in the same place. It's actually 6 or 7 miles away at least. But one of the previous owners of Market Bosworth, or now I keep saying Market Bosworth, there's two Bosworths. There's Husbands Bosworth and Market Bosworth, and people tend to get the two confused. We're talking about Market Bosworth and the Dixie baronets. And there was one of them there. His name was Woolston Dixie. And he's not a nice man, to put it mildly. He's a bully and a misogynist and thick as two short planks, to be quite honest. And in the 18th century, he was the then Dixie baronet who owned and ran the whole estate. And we're talking thousands of acres here. He had a daughter called Anna, who, as the story goes, was in love with the son of a local squire. And she used to sneak out to the woods to meet him. She was about 18, 19. And Daddy didn't like this, because Daddy wanted to marry her off to someone for a political type marriage, someone he chose, not who she chose. He really was a bully. I mean, I won't go into all the details of all the things he did, but Anna's mum, he was a nasty piece of work to her. He banned her from leaving. That she wasn't allowed to go more than 4 miles away from the hall.
Wow.
Anna's mum. She died in childbirth, actually, giving birth to Anna. But anyway, so Anna found out that Dad had put down bear traps to catch her boyfriend and to kill him. So she ran into the woods to warn him to look where he's going. She stood in one, a bear trap. Now, if you go and Google what a bear trap looks like, they're not just little metal things, they're huge. How she got out of it, I don't know, but supposedly she managed to get out of it and crawl back to the hall, bleeding profusely. And she died in the hall. She is meant to be one of the ghosts who's seen. She's known as the Grey Lady, and she's meant to be seen walking around. But also, there is a bloodstain that's meant to keep appearing, and they cannot get rid of it. And the story is that's the stain from her injury where she died. Now, I can say categorically she did exist. Anna Dixie did exist, and Anna Dixie also did die at around 19. So, and she was the daughter of his first wife, and yeah, she did exist. Now, whether she genuinely did die this way, we don't know. But what was interesting is I was doing a talk on paranormal side of the hall to the Bosworth Society, the Market Bosworth Society. And one of them, his dad, had been one of the people who renovated the hall when they turned it into a hospital in the 1930s. And they found the bloodstain and they scrubbed it off 3 times, at least 3 times, and it just kept reappearing. They looked to see if it was copper piping. No copper piping. They looked to see if there was a leak from something that was causing it. No leak. They don't know what it was, but his dad said first-hand witness to this stain just appearing and keep appearing, however many times they cleaned it off.
Incredible. I think there's carpet over it now, isn't it? I think it's in one of the bedrooms and they've just stuck carpet over it.
Well, my understanding, if you go into Bosworth Hall, if you go into the Woolston Suite, which is in the main part of the hall, there's a massive stone fireplace. My understanding is it's just above there.
Right.
But
it is a maze, that place. It really is a maze.
It's a fascinating maze. I mean, it is a really interesting place to explore. Yeah, I mean, I've had some quite weird, even just as a hotel, I've had weird experiences staying there that I can't. I do mention in the book. Yeah, it's I don't think actually the Grey Lady is the only person there. I think the matrons, there was 3 matrons from when it was a hospital, and all of them have made an appearance before on various gadgets and devices and to psychics and stuff who had no way of knowing their names.
Interesting.
I've had Florence Dixie, who's one of my idols, and I've had her come through before. It's, yeah, but the bloodstain, I have had someone tell me, yes, that's been it. Genuinely, we can't get rid of it.
Incredible. Now you're there again this year, and it's September, I do believe, for the festival Unexplained.
Yep.
Been an ideal time to say a little bit about that and some of the other places that people can see you talk. Some of you also at Parameet as well. So if you can say about up and coming events at this point.
Okay, I can't remember all the dates, I'm afraid. So if you want to check them out, you need to go over to Haunted Histories and check them out because
I'll put them in the description.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm my next event I'm doing, which unfortunately, if you've not got a ticket, it's actually sold out. Is the Scary Southwest down in Cornwall. That's next month. It's an all-female lineup, which is quite unusual for the paranormal world. You've got myself, you've got the wonderful Kate Sherrill, you've got the wonderful Jane Harris, you've got the wonderful Karen Besant. We're all doing a talk down in Bude. That's next month. Then in April is the first of the Parameets. That's the south one, I think, in Bradford upon Avon, I want to say off the top of my head.
Very close to it.
Somewhere like that, yep.
Yeah, very close.
Then the next one is, there's another Parameet end of June. That's the Hinckley one. Then I've got the Festival of the Unexplained towards the end of September. There are still day tickets available for that one. Then after that you've got the North Parameet, which I believe is in Pontefract off the top of my head. And then in December I am doing a history talk at Kelvedon Hatch Nuclear Bunker for the Portals to the Paranormal team, and we'll be doing a ghost hunt where I'll be there doing the ghost hunt and using my history knowledge hopefully to get answers for people. That's what's booked in so far, but there's more stuff coming through all the time.
Now you've got a connection with the Wraith Chasers and the Festival Unexplained. It was actually those guys that got you interested in the paranormal.
It's their fault. Yeah. This was quite surreal, actually. Back about 10 years ago, anyone who's had a baby knows about night feeds and knows that you try and find something on the telly because they take an age to feed, and you'll sit there watching the telly whilst you're trying to feed them. I was doing a feed one night with my youngest, and he was really slow. And so I was going through the TV. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I found this program where there was all these lovely blokes talking in accents I couldn't understand a word they were saying. And I just thought, oh, they've got gadgets and they're doing ghost hunts. And so I thought, this is quite good. I quite like this. So I recorded it. I set it to record, so I had more episodes to watch consecutive nights. And it was the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. And I ended up getting to know them. And yeah, I was on the same bill as them for the first ever Paracon that I did with the Festival of the Unexplained a couple of years ago. So it was a bit of it's their fault that anyone who doesn't want me around, it's their fault. They got me into it. They made me realise there's gadgets and stuff. And I know them. Yeah, I know them, and they know the story. I've told them it quite a few times, and yeah, that's my link to the Wraith Chasers. And say the first big festival I ever did, I was on the same bill as them, which was quite a moment for someone who had been a fan of theirs for a long time, and then all of a sudden I'm on the same table as them.
I do like their programs. I particularly like the Haunted Towns. But yes, I'm glad I'm not the only one that sometimes it's like, what have they just said then? I'm not quite sure. So I'm glad that you find that the same way as well.
No, it was Chasey. Chasey Ray was the one in the
yeah, he was only in one series, I think, wasn't he?
Almost. He wanted to focus more on his family and everything, but then again, they don't always. No, he was in 2 or 3 he was in all of the Ghost Asylum programs, but he didn't. And when they went smaller, he'd left by then. But they don't understand us sometimes. I had to, you know, they're very good friends with Nikki and Gemma from the festival team, and even they have to translate sometimes what they mean. But yeah, they're sweethearts. I mean, Brannon, he's one of the nicest people I think I've ever met in my life. He's so sweet, and it was just very surreal to be on the same bill as them. But then again, I'm quite blown that I'm on the same bill as Jane Harris for the thing next month. You know, she's another person who she'll probably be really embarrassed, but she's one of my heroes. And to be on this now on the same bill as her, it's kind of a bit like whoa.
Well, I find most people in the paranormal field, you know, no matter if they're quite big knowns in it or not, most of them are just truly, genuinely lovely people. Yeah. So now we move on to Paranormal Playtime as we're going in the reverse order. Now, I think as we had a particularly interesting experience that is in the book about going into a room, and it was actually Joseph Lancaster. He seemed quite for his time quite forward thinking. So if you can tell about Paranormal Playtime and Joseph Lancaster as well.
So Paranormal Playtime is all about the British School Museum in Hitchin, and this was a type of education that, you're right, Joseph Lancaster pioneered, called the Lancasterian method. He came up with the fact that the reason a lot of poorer people couldn't afford education is teachers were the expensive thing. So is there a way we can teach without needing a teacher per, say, 30 children? And he came up with this monitorial method. Now, he wasn't the only one. There was somebody else called, I've just completely forgotten the other guy's name, Andrew something. He came up with the national schools that were more linked to the church, whereas Lancaster wanted schools that were non-denominational because he didn't want to limit people who were Christian to only be able to get an education. So basically what they did was you could have 300 children in a classroom, one actual teacher, but what you had on each row was a monitor who was there to almost help that row. So they'd have different certification levels. And he came up with that. He was an incredible teacher, an incredible sort of mind when it came to teaching. But as a businessman, he couldn't handle money and business plans and everything else. And quite early on, his schools got taken away from him to be run by people who did understand business. And he suffered quite badly with depression. I'm not sure, I think he was bipolar, reading the descriptions. And he did, I think he was in America when he died. He got hit by a horse and carriage in New York, off the top of my memory. He was a pioneer. He was an absolute pioneer. And there was him and this other chap who came up with, it was called the Madras method, but he was the one who set up national schools, and Joseph Lancaster set up what's called the British and Foreign schools. And Hitchin is I think it's the last surviving one of these that you can actually visit. Brilliant museum, absolutely brilliant museum.
So I've got here, so Cowabunga has to go. Kudos to Penny for her perspective when approaching places and for all the wonderful stories, even though with the flu, she is a one-take wonder. So thank you.
Thank you.
And hello to artist Lana. I hope that you're doing well. Thank you for joining us. And Sean, lovely to see you. That's and thank you, Sean. It's really lovely to see your comment pop up there. So was it during the Paranormal Playtime when you were investigating this place? Is that when you went into a room and time moved for you? So it was like you went back in time, or I got that completely wrong with a wrong place. You went in, it was a locked door. Going into the room, you kind of saw a lady in there. I might be getting my timeline all messed up here, but I thought it was...
I can't remember. I mean, I had the weirdest thing. I had quite a few weird things happened at Hitchin. Because it was during COVID, I was given chances to go into the building when there was nobody else in there during the day, and I was in the corridor where it would have been where the girls' classrooms were, and I could hear a young woman laughing like in the playground, but because the windows are high so that kids couldn't stare out of them, I couldn't actually see because I'm only 5'2". And so I'd taken I held my camera up to take a photo to see if there was anyone in the playground of the school laughing. There was nobody in the camera on the photo. I knew the manager was on the property, and I radioed her to say who else is on the premises, because I've just heard a girl laughing, and I knew it wasn't the manager. And she said, "There's nobody else here. It's just you and me." And I heard someone laughing. I like doing trigger experiments. That's one of my favorite things to come up with. And again, I'm sitting in this corridor and it's a wooden floor. And so I thought I'd play the sound of a bell going off, like a school bell. And I played this bell, and the next thing I heard was footsteps running up the corridor. So it's I can't think of a time slip. There might have been one, but it was a while ago I wrote that book. It was, I did have a weird temperature change when I was in there. I was looking at the archives. They brought me down a load because schools had to complete, I call them captain's logbooks, but they're not, but they're similar sort of thing, captain's logbooks. And they brought me those from when it first opened in the early 1800s, which was mind-blowing because you could still smell tobacco smoke from when they'd been written. It was wild. And I'm sitting there in a room, and I suddenly saw my breath go really cold, and the whole room went really like shivery, freezing. And there was one of those pulls for a screen just started swinging backwards and forwards for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and then temperature's normal again. So there was some interesting stories in that place, and also, I mean, one of the amazing things about that school was the amount of children who it taught to read and write, who actually went on to have their own businesses and get out of because anyone who's ever been to Hitchin probably would find it quite a struggle to accept how poor the place was. The fact that the street, Victoria Street that the school's on, used to be called Dead Street. That's how bad it was. You know, this was a slum. And there was somebody, he dressed up as a vagrant to see what it was like being a tramp, being a transient. And he said it was the worst place he'd ever smelt. It was that bad. And yet Hitchin is actually quite nice now. It's quite an expensive place to live. So it had an awful lot of poverty there, and there's an awful lot of children who were able to learn at this school and it got them out of the poverty trap, which I don't think people realise quite how, because we're so used to education being on our doorstep now, how vital it was to break that circle of poverty for an awful lot of children back then.
Yeah. So I mean, as we were saying, what Joseph did was groundbreaking and great for the time as well. And it's lovely to hear that so many of the children actually had good careers from it as well.
I did actually follow a few of them in the book, and I can't remember the exact details without looking at it. But they gave me copies of some of the registers from the 19th century. So I dug into a couple of the names to find out what had happened to them. And a couple of them did set up their own businesses that their children then inherited from them. I think one was a builder. He became a builder and set up his own builder's yard and everything. And he came from a family that sort of 7 or 8 of them lived in one room. Yet he was able to buy his own house eventually. So, and that was just from having an education courtesy of Joseph Lancaster.
Oh, that's nice. You mentioned Captain's Log, and this shows you that everybody the sort of research that you did, because it reminds me of the Queen Mary. There is always the story that goes round of the girl that drowned in the pool on the Queen Mary. Now, you've pointed at why that isn't, or you don't believe it's the case. So I think that's just reminded me, talking about Captain's Log, if you can say about that and the detailed research that you go into.
Yeah, you're talking about Jackie, the little girl who's meant to have broken her neck in the first class swimming pool. Bear in mind that the Queen Mary, for those of you who don't know, the Queen Mary is the ship that's docked at Long Beach in California. It has loads and loads of ghost hunts done on it. It was actually a troop carrier in World War II. Absolutely fascinating. But one of the supposed spirits that's seen there is a young girl who is seen soaking wet in her swimming costume. Supposedly her name is Jackie, and she broke her neck playing in the swimming pool when the ship hit some rough seas, when it was going from like Cherbourg to New York, something like that. Now, I used to know someone who ran all the paranormal stuff there, and he didn't know where this story had come from. So we started digging, and it transpires it was a psychic who came up with it, said she'd picked up on it while she was on the ship. I know that if someone had died on board a ship, the captain has to document it. Has to, by law. If they die at sea, it has to be documented. There is nothing. I looked so the ship was from the early 30s till 1939. Then from about 1946 until it was decommissioned in the mid-60s. There is nothing to say a young girl died. Now, the argument people have is, oh, well, maybe they didn't document it. Now, if she was first class and larking about in a first-class swimming pool, it would have been documented. Even they've got murders that took place on that ship that are documented. They've also got some that supposedly took place that didn't take place. The room that they're supposed to have took place in never existed. So there's an awful lot of stuff that's been Chinese whispered. But there is nothing to prove this young girl died on that ship. I've also looked at the layout of the pool, how she's meant to have died. I genuinely don't know how it would have happened. My theory on why this young girl's been seen, and a young girl has been seen in a swimming costume running around laughing. How do we not know that she didn't die on the ship? She died of old age, but her spirit has gone back to it because of how much fun she had as a young girl on a ship with a swimming pool. Now, that would have been in the 50s or even the 30s. That would have been amazing to have a swimming pool on that you could access at any time. How do we not know that her spirit hasn't pinged back there? And that's why she's seen. It doesn't. This is another thing that gets me. It doesn't have to be something horrific has happened for a spirit to want to go back to somewhere. It could just be they had the most amazing time and they want to be there again. They want to experience that feeling again. So no, I don't think. I think Jackie. I mean, there were a couple of. I looked at the passenger lists, and there are a couple of passengers that could be Jackie. They could be, but there's no recorded deaths of a young girl that I have been able to find, or people who've worked on the ship as tour guides have been able to find that correlate with that story.
Yeah, no, and I think it's nice that not all ghost stories are tragic. Sometimes it's nice, as you say there. Got 5 minutes left, and I haven't realised that you are doing this with the flu, so thank you so much for doing this. I just want to finish up the last 2 books, seems we're going through them. So first of all, just quickly, The Haunted Experiment, and what sort of experiments did you touch on in that book?
Well, The Haunted Experiment came about, I was actually, we were doing a photo shoot for the Daily Mail of women in the paranormal, and I was listening to some of the other women talking about various things, and I thought, well, everything's got a history, so what's the history of these theories? So what's the history of the EVP? What's the history of the Estes method? What's the history? Everything has a history. So I thought, well, rather than write a book that says how to do them, why don't I write a book that says why they came about in the first place and who came up with them and things? And that's where Haunted Experiment came about. But what I also did was use them in a few locations to see if they produced anything. So one of my favourite places is RAF Tibenham in Norfolk, which was a US Air Force bomber base. Jimmy Stewart was based there. I did the Phillips experiment there. Nothing happened to do with it. We had stuff happen, but not to do with the Phillips experiment. I also went to a place called the Kurzel, which is in Southend, which was in the 60s, was a rock venue. And so we used music by like Thin Lizzy, AC/DC, Judas Priest, all of whom we played there in their day, to see if anything happened. And stuff did. Obviously, EVPs is another one. The Estes method, used that a few times as well. So it was to show sort of where the background of these experiments come from, because I think if you understand the background, you can make changes to develop them even further. Rather than telling people how to do them, is where did it come from? And that was The Haunted Experiment. I'm still incredibly proud of that book, because it was a lot of work at the time. It was only my second book. The first one I did was My Haunted History, and that came about because I'd started doing the Haunted Histories podcast, and I always wrote a script which had the history. And somebody said, it was actually Richard Estep who actually wrote the foreword for it. He said, you could turn these into a book. So it's why if anyone reads it, it's very sort of technical. The history bit's technical, but then you have more of a chatty bit of the actual investigation. That's done deliberately. So, and that was the first one. So I looked at 10 different locations that I'd investigated, but I'd also done a show on, and used my history research for part of the chapter, and then anything I'd found doing an investigation for the second half.
Brilliant. So I'm going to bring it to a close very, very soon. Just 2 questions that I like to sort of finish off with. The first one is not just the books. You've got a podcast as well. Where can people get hold of you and know more wonderful things about the Haunted Histories?
Well, there's hauntedhistories.co.uk website. There's Haunted Histories on Facebook. I'm on X, or whatever it's called now, Twitter, whatever it's called now. Email address is on there, hauntedhistories@virginmedia.com. The podcast comes out once a month or so. I also write for Haunted magazine. So I'm quite accessible on the internet if people want to go come and have a look.
Excellent. My last question is, the research that you've done on the history and the hauntings, when you come across that piece of information for the very first time, what one of those really sticks in your mind and got you excited when you first discovered it?
They all do. They genuinely all do. When I stumble across something that suddenly makes the pieces fit, there's lots of little swear words coming out. But I think I'll probably go back to that Jake Quickenden one. When I found out that the farmhouse was exactly on where his house was, then I find the story of the body in the attic. That still sends shivers up my spine, because it was just like one thing after another was clicking into place. But no, any research I do that suddenly goes, damn. Like if somebody says a name that keeps coming through on a device, and then I find that name and it's like an unusual name, like Mabel, has a massive link to the place that we're in, I get excited. I don't think that. I think the minute I stop getting excited by things like that happening is the minute I hang up my history roots and do something it's it gives me sleepless nights, but in a good way, when things like that happen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for spending this time with all of us tonight, Penny. And thank you to all of you that are watching now at this moment. I'll see you again in another video. I can't remember exactly the time it is, but I'm interviewing Maria Wheatley, and you're going to enjoy that because it's about ancient sites, so that's going to be really good. Thank you, everybody, for watching.